The sun was still high above the horizon when the periscope cut through the Pacific surface. It was March 1943, and just a few miles away, a Japanese convoy sailed blissfully unaware toward its destination. 4 supply ships loaded to the deck with war materials, ammunition, fuel, and provisions destined for garrisons scattered across the South Pacific. Their captains had no reason for concern. Every Japanese commander knew that American submarines were cautious, almost timid. They attacked submerged at night, preferably against isolated targets, and when they missed with their defective torpedoes, which happened with irritating frequency, they simply fled. But what was approaching that convoy was not a typical American submarine, and the man in command definitely did not follow the manual. Dudley Walker Morton was different from any officer the American Navy had ever produced. His men called him Mush, a childhood nickname he carried with pride. He was 36 years old, broad-shouldered, with a smile that could light up the cramped compartments of a fleet submarine. But behind that infectious grin lived a warrior of almost frightening intensity. Where other submarine captains saw danger, Morton saw opportunity. Where doctrine prescribed caution, he chose audacity. And on that March day in 1943, he was about to do something that would make admirals in Pearl Harbor choke on their coffee. The standard procedure for American submarines was clear and had been drilled into every officer at the submarine school in New London. Approach submerged, fire torpedoes from a safe distance, dive deep, and run. The submarine was a weapon of stealth, not confrontation. Its thin hull, designed to withstand pressure at depth, would crumple like paper under the fire of a destroyer's deck guns. A surface attack in broad daylight against multiple armed vessels was not just unauthorized, it was considered suicidal. The Navy's Submarine Doctrine Manual dedicated entire chapters to explaining why such action should never be attempted. Morton had read that manual. He simply disagreed with it. If you're enjoying this story so far, take a moment to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. What you're about to hear is one of the most audacious submarine attacks of the Second World War, and you won't want to miss a single detail. The USS Wahoo had left Pearl Harbor in late February 1943 on her 4th war patrol. Her destination was the Yellow Sea, near the mouth of the Yalu River, waters where no American submarine had ever operated. The area was considered too shallow, too dangerous, too close to Japanese air bases. Perfect, Morton had thought when he received his orders. Surprise would be complete because the Japanese simply wouldn't believe any American commander would be crazy enough to venture there. Morton had already established his reputation on Wahoo's previous patrols. During her 3rd patrol in January, he had done the unthinkable. He had taken his submarine into Wewak Harbor, a heavily defended Japanese anchorage on the coast of New Guinea, and torpedoed a destroyer right at the dock. No American submarine captain had ever penetrated an enemy harbor to attack. The conventional wisdom said it couldn't be done. Morton did it anyway, and when Wahoo emerged from those dangerous waters, the destroyer Harusami was settling on the bottom. But it was what Morton did after Wewak that truly set him apart. On January 26th, Wahoo encountered a convoy of Japanese ships, including the transport Buyomaru. Morton attacked with torpedoes, sending ships to the bottom. Then, with the cold calculation of a man who understood total war, he surfaced among the survivors. What followed remains controversial to this day, a reminder that the Pacific War was fought with a savagery that defied the sanitized versions often told in history books. Now, in March 1943, Morton was taking Wahoo into even more dangerous waters. The Yellow Sea presented unique challenges. Its shallow depths, often less than 200 feet, meant that a submarine had nowhere to hide if detected. Deep diving, the standard escape tactic, was simply impossible. If Japanese destroyers caught Wahoo on the surface, Morton would have to fight his way out, or die trying. Most submarine captains would have considered these odds unacceptable. Morton considered them interesting. The crew of Wahoo had learned to trust their captain's unconventional methods. Morton ran his boat differently than any other submarine commander in the fleet. He had instituted a radical change in attack procedures. During torpedo attacks, his executive officer, Lieutenant Richard O'Kane, manned the periscope and called out bearings and ranges, while Morton himself stood at the plotting table, absorbing the entire tactical picture. This freed the captain to think strategically, rather than getting tunnel vision through the periscope's narrow view. It was an innovation that other submarine captains initially mocked, until they saw Wahoo's results. O'Kane was Morton's perfect complement. Where Morton was gregarious and loud, O'Kane was quiet and precise. Where Morton led by sheer force of personality, O'Kane led by meticulous competence. Together, they formed perhaps the most lethal command team in the submarine force. O'Kane would later take command of his own submarine, USS Tang, and become the most successful American submarine commander of the war. But in March 1943, he was still learning at the feet of the master. The morning of March 19th dawned gray and overcast over the Yellow Sea. Wahoo was running on the surface, her diesel engines charging batteries and pushing her northward at 15 knots. The lookouts swept the horizon with binoculars, searching for the telltale smoke that would betray a Japanese vessel. At 0847, the port lookout sang out, smoke on the horizon, bearing 270. Morton was in the conning tower within seconds. He raised his binoculars and studied the distant smudge. It was a freighter, medium-sized, probably around 3,000 tons. She was alone, no escorts visible. A perfect target for a conventional submerged attack. Morton could dive, approach undetected, fire a spread of torpedoes, and be gone before the Japanese knew what hit them. It was exactly what doctrine prescribed. Morton had a different idea. The freighter was identified as Zogan Maru, a cargo vessel carrying supplies for Japanese forces in China. Morton ordered Wahoo to close the distance on the surface, running at flank speed. His reasoning was simple. A surface approach was faster, and speed meant more attacks, and more attacks meant more ships on the bottom. The mathematics of killing calculated with cold efficiency. As Wahoo closed to firing range, Morton ordered a single torpedo, just one. Torpedoes were precious, and Morton hated wasting them. The Mark 14 torpedo, America's standard submarine weapon, had been plagued with problems since the war began. Magnetic exploders that failed to detonate. Contact exploders that crumpled on impact without triggering. Depth-keeping mechanisms that ran too deep, sending torpedoes harmlessly beneath their targets. Morton had lost count of the fish he had watched streak toward Japanese ships, only to pass underneath or explode prematurely. The single torpedo ran true. It struck Zogan Maru in the after section with a thunderous detonation that split the ship nearly in two. The stern section sank immediately, dragged down by the weight of her cargo. The bow section lingered for 2 minutes, pointing toward the sky like an accusing finger, before it too slipped beneath the waves. There were no survivors. Morton noted the time in his log and ordered Wahoo to continue the hunt. 4 hours later, another smoke plume appeared on the horizon. This was Kowa Maru, another freighter, slightly larger than the first. Morton closed again on the surface, fired 2 torpedoes. Both hit. Kowa Maru went down in less than 10 minutes, her back broken by the twin explosions. The crew of Wahoo was beginning to sense that this patrol was going to be something special. 2 ships in less than 5 hours, and they hadn't even reached their primary patrol area yet. The mood aboard was electric. Men who had served on other submarines, where a single sinking in a 2-month patrol was considered success, could hardly believe their luck. But luck had nothing to do with it. This was Morton's relentless aggression, his refusal to let any opportunity pass, his willingness to take risks that other captains wouldn't consider. The next day brought a new challenge. Wahoo sighted another freighter, Hosen Maru, but this time the attack didn't go as planned. Morton fired 2 torpedoes and both exploded prematurely, detonating before they reached the target. The premature explosions were caused by the defective magnetic exploders, and they alerted Hosen Maru to the submarine's presence. The freighter turned away and began zigzagging, trying to escape. Any other submarine captain would have let her go. The element of surprise was lost. The target was now alert and maneuvering. Doctrine clearly stated that a submarine should break off contact under such circumstances and search for easier prey. Morton had other plans. "Battle surface," he ordered. The command sent a jolt through the crew. Battle surface meant bringing Wahoo up to fight with her deck guns, a 4-inch cannon, and several smaller automatic weapons. It meant exposing the submarine's vulnerable hull to enemy fire. It meant abandoning the submarine's primary advantage, invisibility. It was exactly the kind of attack the Navy had explicitly warned against. Wahoo broke the surface in a cascade of white water. Men scrambled up through the hatches, racing to man the deck gun. The gun crew had drilled this evolution countless times, but there was nothing routine about doing it for real, with an enemy ship in sight and Japanese aircraft potentially minutes away. The 4-inch gun was loaded and trained on Hosen Maru within 60 seconds. What followed was a systematic destruction that belonged more to the age of sail than to modern submarine warfare. Wahoo closed to point-blank range, circling the crippled freighter like a shark around wounded prey. The 4-inch gun barked again and again, sending shell after shell into Hosen Maru's hull. The 20-millimeter cannons added their rapid-fire chatter, raking the decks and superstructure. In just under an hour, Wahoo had pumped nearly 94-inch rounds into the target. Hosen Maru was burning from stem to stern when she finally rolled over and sank. Morton watched her go down, then immediately ordered the lookouts to sweep the horizon for new targets. There was no celebration, no pause to reflect on what they had just accomplished. The hunt continued. The following days brought more of the same. Morton drove Wahoo relentlessly through the Yellow Sea, attacking anything that floated under the Japanese flag. Freighters, tankers, trawlers, nothing was too small or too insignificant to escape his attention. When torpedoes worked, he used torpedoes. When they didn't, he surfaced and used guns. The decision about which method to employ was purely tactical, based on circumstances, not on any artificial distinction between proper and improper submarine warfare. The 4th War Patrol would ultimately be credited with sinking 9 vessels, including 8 merchant ships and a trawler, totaling over 36,000 tons of enemy shipping. The Navy Cross citation would praise Morton's outstanding professional skill and excellent judgment. What the citation didn't mention was that Morton had achieved these results by systematically ignoring virtually every guideline in the Submarine Operations Manual. But it was one particular attack during this patrol that would become legendary, the daylight surface attack that gave this story its title. The details were almost too audacious to believe. 4 supply ships traveling together, spotted in the early afternoon. Morton ordered Wahoo to surface and attack, not with torpedoes from safe distance, but with deck guns at close range in broad daylight, with the sun still high in the sky. The supply ships were caught completely off guard. Japanese naval doctrine, based on their experience with cautious American submarine tactics, hadn't prepared them for this. A submarine attacking on the surface in daylight? The concept was so foreign that the Japanese crews initially couldn't process what they were seeing. By the time they realized the danger, Wahoo's guns were already speaking. The first ship went down quickly, her hull riddled by 4-inch shells. The second tried to run, but Wahoo was faster on the surface than any cargo ship. Morton ran her down like a wolf chasing a deer, closing the distance until his gunners couldn't miss. The third ship actually tried to fight back, her crew manning a small deck gun and firing at the submarine. The rounds fell short, splashing into the sea between the vessels. Wahoo's response was devastating, a concentrated barrage that silenced the enemy gun and sent the ship to the bottom within minutes. The fourth ship was the largest, a tanker carrying fuel for Japanese operations in China. Her captain tried everything, zigzagging, changing speed, even turning toward Wahoo in a desperate attempt to ram. Morton simply matched his maneuvers, keeping the submarine in the perfect position for his gunners. When the tanker finally gave up and stopped, her crew abandoning ship, Wahoo closed to deliver the killing blow. A few well-placed shells in the waterline opened her hull to the sea. She sank slowly, a spreading oil slick marking her grave. 4 ships. One afternoon, no torpedoes expended. Morton had done with deck guns what most submarine captains couldn't accomplish with an unlimited supply of torpedoes. And he had done it in broad daylight on the surface, in direct violation of every principle of submarine warfare that the Navy held dear. When Wahoo returned to Pearl Harbor in early April, her battle flag flying proudly, the submarine force was divided. Some officers praised Morton's results. You couldn't argue with 36,000 tons of enemy shipping on the bottom. Others were horrified by his methods. What Morton was doing, they argued, was turning the submarine into a surface warship, negating its primary advantages of stealth and concealment. If other captains followed his example, the argument went, submarine losses would skyrocket. Morton had little patience for such criticism. He pointed to his results and asked a simple question. Was the goal to preserve submarines or to sink Japanese ships? The Navy had sent him to war with defective torpedoes, inadequate training, and doctrine based on peacetime assumptions. He had adapted, he had improvised, and he had killed more enemy ships in 4 patrols than most submarines managed in their entire careers. If that meant breaking a few rules, so be it. The debate would continue throughout the war, but events would ultimately vindicate Morton's approach. Other aggressive submarine captains, Sam Dealey of the Harder, Eugene Fluckey of the Barb, Lawson Red Ramage of the Parsh, would adopt similar tactics. The surface gun attack, once considered foolhardy, became a standard technique for dealing with targets too small to waste torpedoes on. By war's end, American submarines had sunk over 5 million tons of Japanese shipping, strangling the island nation's ability to wage war. Much of that success could be traced directly to the tactical innovations pioneered by Mush Morton. But Morton himself would not live to see the final victory. In September 1943, Wahoo departed Pearl Harbor for her 7th war patrol. Her destination was the Sea of Japan, the most dangerous waters in the Pacific for an American submarine. The Sea of Japan was surrounded by Japanese territory on 3 sides, accessible only through narrow straits that were heavily patrolled and mined. No American submarine had ever operated there successfully. Morton, characteristically, was eager for the challenge. He had spent his career seeking out the most dangerous assignments, the places where other captains feared to go. The Sea of Japan represented the ultimate test of his skills and his crew's courage. If he could operate successfully in those waters, he would prove once and for all that aggressive tactics could succeed anywhere. The patrol started well. Despite the dangers, Wahoo penetrated into the Sea of Japan and immediately began finding targets. In the first week of October, Morton sank 4 ships, a tanker, 2 freighters, and a transport. The Japanese had not expected an American submarine in these supposedly safe waters, and their defenses were initially caught flat-footed. But the attacks also alerted the Japanese to Wahoo's presence. Patrol boats, aircraft, and minefields converged on the areas where attacks had occurred. The narrow straits leading out of the Sea of Japan were reinforced with additional mines and patrol vessels. For Morton, the hunter was becoming the hunted. On October 11, 1943, Wahoo attempted to exit the Sea of Japan through La Perouse Strait, the narrow passage between Hokkaido and Sakhalin Island. Japanese coast watchers spotted the submarine on the surface. Within minutes, aircraft from Wakkanai were in the air, and submarine chasers CH-15, CH-43, and minesweeper WA-18 were racing to intercept. What happened next will never be known with certainty. The Japanese reported attacking a submarine in La Perouse Strait, dropping depth charges and observing oil and debris rising to the surface. Wahoo never responded to radio calls from Pearl Harbor. She was declared overdue and presumed lost on November 9, 1943. All 79 men aboard, including Dudley Walker Morton, were gone. The loss of Wahoo was a devastating blow to the submarine force. Morton had been more than just a successful captain. He had been an inspiration, a symbol of what aggressive tactics could accomplish. His death at 36 seemed impossibly young for a man who had already achieved so much. The Navy awarded him a posthumous Navy Cross and named a destroyer escort in his honor. But the greatest tribute came from the submarine captains who continued his work, taking his lessons into battle and applying them with deadly effect. Richard O'Kane, Morton's former executive officer, took command of USS Tang and became the most successful American submarine captain of the war. In a cruel twist of fate, Tang was sunk by her own torpedo, a circular run that brought the weapon back to strike the submarine that had fired it. O'Kane survived and spent the rest of the war as a prisoner of the Japanese. He was awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions aboard Tang and later wrote a memoir of his time under Morton's command, ensuring that Mush Morton's legend would live on. Sam Dealey of USS Harder became known as the destroyer killer for his attacks on Japanese escorts, the very ships that were supposed to protect convoys from submarines. Like Morton, Dealey believed that the best defense was an overwhelming offense. He was lost in August 1944, also attacking Japanese destroyers. Eugene Fluckey of USS Barb took Morton's surface attack concept to its logical extreme, actually landing parties on the Japanese home islands to blow up a train. He was awarded the Medal of Honor and survived the war to write his own account of submarine warfare in the Pacific. Lawson Red Ramage of USS Parashi conducted what many consider the most spectacular surface attack of the war, a night action in July 1944, where he charged through a Japanese convoy, firing torpedoes in all directions, sinking 5 ships and damaging 2 others in less than an hour. He, too, received the Medal of Honor. Each of these men owed a debt to Morton. He had shown them what was possible when a submarine captain threw away the rulebook and fought with pure aggression. He had proved that the submarine could be an offensive weapon, not just a defensive one. And he had demonstrated, at the cost of his own life, that victory sometimes required risks that peacetime doctrine could never anticipate. The tactical lessons of Morton's career continue to resonate today. Modern submarine commanders still study his methods, not to copy them exactly. Technology has changed too much for that, but to understand the mindset that made them successful. Morton's willingness to challenge doctrine, to adapt to circumstances, to seize opportunities regardless of risk. These qualities are timeless. They apply whether the submarine is a fleet boat from 1943 or a nuclear attack submarine from the present day. The strategic implications of Morton's career are equally important. His attacks in the Yellow Sea and Sea of Japan demonstrated that no waters were truly safe for Japanese shipping. Every Japanese merchant captain had to wonder whether an American submarine might appear at any moment in any location. This psychological impact was almost as important as the physical destruction of ships. It forced the Japanese to divert resources to convoy escorts and patrol vessels, resources that might otherwise have been used for offensive operations. The human cost of Morton's tactics is harder to assess. His aggressive style certainly put his crew at greater risk than a more cautious approach would have. The men who served under him knew they were more likely to see action and more likely to die than submariners on other boats. Yet there was never any shortage of volunteers for Wahoo. Morton's reputation attracted the best officers and sailors in the submarine force, men who wanted to make a difference in the war and were willing to accept the risks involved. There is also the darker side of Morton's legacy, the incident at Bayo Maru, where Wahoo surfaced among Japanese survivors and opened fire. This remains one of the most controversial episodes in American submarine history. Morton's defenders argue that the men in the water were enemy soldiers who would have rejoined the fight if rescued. His critics call it a war crime. The truth, like so much in war, probably lies somewhere between these extremes. Morton made a decision in the heat of battle, under impossible pressure, with incomplete information. Whether it was the right decision is a question that historians continue to debate. What is beyond debate is the impact that Morton had on the submarine war in the Pacific. When he took command of Wahoo in December 1942, American submarines were underperforming badly. Defective torpedoes, cautious tactics, and inadequate training had combined to make them far less effective than they should have been. When Morton was lost in October 1943, barely 10 months later, he had personally sunk 19 ships totaling over 55,000 tons, and, more importantly, he had shown an entire generation of submarine commanders how to fight. The Yellow Sea attack that gave this story its title, 4 supply ships sunk in a single afternoon of daylight surface warfare, was unauthorized by any reasonable interpretation of Navy doctrine. It violated the principles of submarine warfare that had been taught at New London for decades. It exposed Wahoo and her crew to risks that most officers would have considered unacceptable. And it worked. That is perhaps the most important lesson of Morton's career. Doctrine exists for good reasons. It captures the accumulated wisdom of those who came before. But doctrine can also become a prison, limiting thinking and preventing adaptation to new circumstances. Morton understood that war is chaos, that the enemy gets a vote, and that success often requires doing the unexpected. He threw away the rule book because the rule book wasn't working, and in doing so, he changed the course of the submarine war in the Pacific. The wreck of Wahoo was located in 2006, resting in about 200 feet of water in La Perouse Strait. Divers have visited the site and confirmed the submarine's identity. The hull shows damage consistent with depth charge attack, suggesting that Morton and his crew were fighting to the end. They now rest in eternal patrol, far from home, in the cold waters of the strait they were trying to escape. In Pearl Harbor, the USS Boffin Submarine Museum displays artifacts from Wahoo and tells the story of Morton's remarkable career. At the Submarine School in New London, where future submarine officers learn their trade, Morton's tactics are still studied and discussed. His portrait hangs in the Gallery of Submarine Heroes alongside O'Kane, Dealey, Fluckey, and Ramage, the aggressive captains who transformed American submarine warfare and helped win the Pacific War. But perhaps the most fitting memorial to Morton is the one he would have appreciated most: the continued tradition of aggressive, innovative submarine warfare that traces directly to his example. Every time an American submarine captain chooses offense over defense, every time a commander sees opportunity where others see only danger, every time a sailor pushes beyond the boundaries of doctrine to accomplish the mission. That is Morton's legacy. That is what it means to fight like Mush Morton fought. The sun that set over the Yellow Sea in March 1943 witnessed something unprecedented. An American submarine on the surface, guns blazing, hunting enemy ships in broad daylight. It was unauthorized, unprecedented, and undeniably effective. 4 supply ships lay on the bottom, their cargoes of war material lost forever to the Japanese war effort. And Dudley Walker Morton, grinning behind his binoculars, was already scanning the horizon for his next target. In war, as in life, the bold rarely follow the safe path. Morton proved that success sometimes requires breaking the rules. His daylight surface attack remains a testament to what one determined commander can achieve when he refuses to accept the limits imposed by doctrine, tradition, and fear. It is a lesson that resonates across the decades, a reminder that victory belongs not to the cautious, but to those willing to risk everything in pursuit of it.